I was only 3 years old when I witnessed something that would forever change how I see the world. The memory is burned into my mind like a scar that never fades. The image of a small, trembling nose barely visible beneath a pile of dirt and leaves under the old metal playground slide. But what happened next? What I did as a toddler who could barely form complete sentences. That moment taught an entire community about the power of pure, innocent love. Speech balloon, I'd love to know. What time is it where you are right now? And which city or state are you watching from? Let me take you back to that autumn day in 1987, to a small town in Ohio where the leaves crunched beneath tiny feet and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. I was Emma then, just a little girl with pigtails and grass-stained overalls, living in a world where magic seemed possible and every day held the promise of adventure. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where mothers called their children home for dinner from front porches, where screen doors slammed shut behind running feet, and where the local playground served as the center of our small universe. The playground sat at the heart of Maple Street, surrounded by modest homes with white picket fences and gardens that bloomed with late-season chrysanthemums. My mother, Sarah, was 24 then, young enough to still believe in fairy tales, but old enough to worry about real-world dangers. She had married my father straight out of high school, and I came along 2 years later, filling their small house with the chaos that only a toddler can bring. My father worked long hours at the steel mill, leaving before dawn and returning after sunset, his hands permanently stained with grease and his shoulders bent with exhaustion. But my mother, she was my everything. She smelled like vanilla and lavender, and her laugh could chase away any nightmare. Every morning after breakfast, she would bundle me up in my little red coat and walk me to the playground, where I would spend hours climbing the monkey bars that seemed impossibly high and sliding down the metal slide that grew hot under the October sun. The playground equipment was old even then, installed in the 1960s when safety standards were more suggestions than requirements. The slide was a towering metal structure that gleamed silver in the sunlight, with a ladder that stretched up toward the clouds. Beneath it, the ground was worn bare from decades of children's feet, creating a dusty hollow where the grass had long since given up trying to grow. I remember that particular morning with crystalline clarity. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the distant aroma of Mrs. Henderson's apple pie cooling on her windowsill. My mother sat on the wooden bench nearby, reading a paperback novel while keeping one eye on me as I played. I had been spinning on the old merry-go-round until I felt dizzy, then stumbled off toward the slide, my small legs unsteady beneath me. The world tilted and swayed as I tried to regain my balance, and I ended up sitting down hard in the dirt, right next to the base of the slide structure. That's when I heard it. The sound was so faint at first that I thought it might be the wind whistling through the metal bars. But as I sat there, brushing dirt from my scraped palms, I heard it again, a tiny, desperate whimper that seemed to come from the earth itself. I crawled closer to the slide, my knees scraping against the hard-packed dirt. The sound was definitely coming from underneath the structure, from a shadowy space where older kids sometimes hid during games of hide-and-seek. But this wasn't the sound of children playing. This was the sound of something dying. My 3-year-old mind couldn't fully comprehend what I was hearing, but something deep in my chest, some primal instinct that transcends age and understanding, told me that whatever was making that sound needed help. I pressed my face close to the ground, trying to peer into the darkness beneath the slide. That's when I saw the nose. It was small and black, barely visible through a layer of dirt and decomposing leaves. At first, I thought it might be a toy that some other child had buried and forgotten. But then it moved, just slightly, a barely perceptible twitch that sent my heart racing. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. In my limited vocabulary, I had no words for what I was seeing. I only knew that something was buried under the playground slide, something alive that was struggling to breathe. "Mama," I called out, my voice high and urgent. "Mama, come see." My mother looked up from her book, probably expecting to find me stuck in the monkey bars or needing help reaching the top of the slide. She marked her place with a fallen leaf and walked over to where I was kneeling in the dirt. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice carrying that patient tone that mothers perfect after years of investigating their children's discoveries. I pointed toward the base of the slide, my small finger trembling with excitement and fear. "There, Mama. There's something there." My mother knelt beside me, following my gaze toward the shadowy space beneath the metal structure. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the accumulated debris of many seasons, leaves and twigs, and the occasional forgotten toy. But then she heard it too. The whimper was weaker now, barely audible above the sound of wind through the nearby oak trees. But it was definitely there, a sound that spoke of pain and desperation and the kind of fear that comes from being trapped in darkness. "Oh my God," my mother whispered, and I heard something in her voice that I had never heard before. A mixture of horror and determination that made my stomach flutter with nervous energy. She began pulling away the layers of debris with her hands, working carefully but urgently. Leaves and small branches flew aside as she dug deeper, following the sound that grew stronger with each handful of earth she removed. And then she uncovered him. The puppy was impossibly small, no bigger than my stuffed rabbit at home. His fur, which should have been golden and fluffy, was matted with dirt and moisture, plastered against his tiny body like a second skin. His eyes were closed, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we were too late. But then his chest rose and fell with a shallow, labored breath. "He's alive," my mother breathed, her hands hovering over the tiny form, as if she were afraid that touching him might somehow make him disappear. "Emma, baby, run to Mrs. Peterson's house and ask her to call Dr. Martinez." "Can you do that for Mama?" But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the sight of the puppy, by the way his tiny paws twitched as if he were trying to run in his dreams. Something deep inside my 3-year-old heart broke and mended itself in the same instant. And I knew with absolute certainty that this little creature and I were connected in a way that went beyond understanding. Instead of running to Mrs. Peterson's house, I reached out my hand, the same hand that had been reaching for toys and cookies and my mother's fingers since I learned to grasp, and gently touched the puppy's matted fur. The moment my skin made contact with his, something magical happened. His eyes fluttered open. They were the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen, dark brown with golden flecks that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the playground equipment. They were eyes that held pain and fear, yes, but also something else. Something that looked remarkably like hope. "Hi, little baby," I whispered, using the same voice I used when talking to my dolls. "It's okay. We're going to help you." The puppy's tail, barely visible beneath the layers of grime, gave the faintest of wags. My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she watched the interaction between her daughter and this tiny, broken creature. She had seen something in that moment that would change her perspective on compassion forever. The way pure, innocent love could reach across species and circumstance to create connection. "Emma," she said softly, "we need to get him to Dr. Martinez right away. Can you help Mama carry him?" I nodded solemnly, understanding that this was the most important job I had ever been given. Together, we lifted the puppy from his earthen prison, my small hands supporting his head while my mother cradled his body. He was so light that I was afraid he might float away like a dandelion seed on the wind. As we carried him toward our house, I kept my face close to his, whispering words of comfort that came from some deep well of knowing that I didn't even realize I possessed. "You're safe now," I told him. "We're going to take care of you. You're going to be okay." The walk to Dr. Martinez's veterinary clinic felt like it took hours, though it was probably no more than 10 minutes. My mother held the puppy carefully while I trotted alongside, my hand resting gently on his tiny head. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my palm, rapid and irregular, but definitely there. Dr. Martinez was a kind man with silver hair and gentle hands who had been caring for the animals in our small town for over 30 years. When we burst through his clinic door, carrying our muddy, fragile burden, he took one look at the situation and immediately cleared his examination table. "What do we have here?" he asked softly, his experienced eyes taking in the puppy's condition as my mother carefully placed him on the table. "We found him buried under the playground slide," my mother explained, her voice shaking with residual shock. "Emma heard him whimpering and led me to him. I don't know how long he's been there, but he's barely breathing." Dr. Martinez began his examination with practiced efficiency, his hands moving gently over the puppy's small body. I watched from my mother's arms, my 3-year-old eyes taking in every detail of the veterinarian's work. "He's severely dehydrated," Dr. Martinez murmured, more to himself than to us. "Probably hasn't eaten in days. There are no obvious injuries, which is good, but his body temperature is dangerously low." "Is he going to be okay?" my mother asked, voicing the question that was burning in my chest. Dr. Martinez looked up at us, his expression grave but not without hope. "It's going to be touch and go for the next few hours. He's going to need constant care, warming, feeding, monitoring. But he's young, and young animals have a remarkable capacity for recovery if they get the right care." He paused, looking directly at me with those kind eyes. "And it seems like he has something to fight for now." I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I nodded anyway, my small face serious with the weight of responsibility I felt toward this tiny creature. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Martinez set up a warming bed and began the delicate process of rehydrating the puppy with tiny amounts of fluid. My mother called my father at work, explaining the situation in hushed tones while I maintained my vigil beside the examination table. The puppy slept fitfully, his tiny body twitching with dreams that I could only hope were better than his recent reality. Every few minutes, his eyes would flutter open and search the room until they found mine. When our gazes met, his tail would give that same faint wag, and I would lean closer to whisper more words of encouragement. "You're being so brave," I told him during one of these moments. "Just like the puppies in my storybooks. You're going to grow up big and strong, and we're going to play together every day." As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable began to happen. The puppy's breathing became steadier, his eyes stayed open for longer periods, and when Dr. Martinez offered him small amounts of special puppy formula, he began to drink eagerly. "He's responding beautifully," Dr. Martinez told us, his professional composure unable to hide his obvious relief. "I've rarely seen such a dramatic turnaround in such a short time." My mother squeezed my shoulder. "I think he knows he's loved," she said softly. And he did know. Even in my limited 3-year-old understanding, I could see the change in the puppy's demeanor as the hours passed. The fear began to fade from his eyes, replaced by something that looked remarkably like trust. By evening, he was strong enough to sit up on his own, his tiny head swiveling to track my movements around the examination room. When I approached the table, he would strain toward me, his little pink tongue darting out to lick my fingers. "What are you going to call him?" Dr. Martinez asked as we prepared to take the puppy home for the night. I looked at the puppy, considering this monumental decision with all the seriousness that a 3-year-old can muster. He had been buried in the dark, trapped and alone, until love had found him and brought him back to the light. "Sonny," I announced with absolute certainty. "His name is Sonny." My mother smiled, tears once again gathering in her eyes. "Sonny it is," she agreed. That night, Sonny slept in a basket beside my bed, wrapped in one of my baby blankets. I kept one hand hanging over the edge of my mattress, my fingers resting gently on his warm fur. Every time he stirred, I would whisper soft words of comfort, and he would settle back into peaceful sleep. But the real transformation began the next morning. Word of our rescue had spread through the neighborhood with the speed that only small-town news can achieve. By the time we took Sonny outside for his first real walk, Mrs. Henderson was waiting by her fence with a bag of homemade puppy treats. Mr. Johnson, the gruff old man who lived on the corner and rarely spoke to anyone, stopped to ask about Sonny's progress and slipped my mother a $20 bill to help with veterinary expenses. The most remarkable change, however, was in me. Before Sonny, I had been a typical 3-year-old, self-centered in the way that all toddlers are, focused primarily on my own needs and desires. But caring for this tiny, vulnerable creature awakened something in me that I hadn't known existed. I began to notice things I had never seen before. The way the elderly cat who lived next door moved stiffly in the mornings, suggesting arthritis. The fact that the sparrows who nested in our eaves seemed to have fewer babies this year than last. The small acts of kindness that happened around me every day. My mother saving table scraps for the stray dogs that sometimes wandered through our neighborhood. My father leaving water bowls outside during hot weather. Sonny grew stronger each day, his golden fur beginning to fluff out as proper nutrition and love worked their magic. But more than that, he seemed to understand his role in our family with an intelligence that amazed even Dr. Martinez. He appointed himself my protector, following me everywhere with devotion that bordered on the mystical. If I wandered too far from my mother at the playground, Sonny would gently take my hand in his mouth and guide me back. If I fell and scraped my knee, he would sit beside me and lick away my tears until I stopped crying. But it was the way he interacted with other children that truly revealed the depth of his transformation. Sonny seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense when someone was sad or frightened. He would approach quietly, his tail wagging gently, and simply sit beside them until they felt ready to pet him. I watched him comfort a little boy who had been stung by a bee, a girl who was crying because her parents were arguing, and even a teenager who was sitting alone on the playground equipment, looking lost and hopeless. The teenager's name was Jake, and he was going through what adults called a rough patch. His parents were getting divorced, he was struggling in school, and he had recently been caught shoplifting from the local convenience store. The whole town was talking about him, using words like troublemaker and heading down the wrong path. But Sonny saw something different. One afternoon, Jake was sitting on the swings, slowly rocking back and forth with his head in his hands. Most people would have avoided him, but Sonny walked directly up to the swing set and sat down beside Jake's feet. Jake looked down at the small golden puppy, and for a moment, I saw his tough exterior crack just slightly. "Hey, boy," he said softly, reaching down to scratch behind Sonny's ears. That's when I decided to approach too. "His name is Sonny," I announced, climbing onto the swing beside Jake. "We found him buried under the slide, but now he's all better." Jake looked at me with surprise. He had probably never had a conversation with a 3-year-old before, but something in my earnest expression seemed to disarm him. "Buried under the slide?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I told him the whole story, how I had heard the whimpering, how my mother and I had dug Sonny out of the dirt, how Dr. Martinez had saved his life, and how Sonny had become the most important member of our family. As I talked, Jake's expression gradually softened. He kept petting Sonny, who had positioned himself so that he was touching both of us, creating a bridge of connection between a troubled teenager and an innocent toddler. "That's amazing," Jake said when I finished my story. "You saved his life." I shook my head seriously. "We saved each other," I corrected him. "That's what Mama says. When you help someone who needs help, it helps you too." Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering this wisdom from someone who hadn't even started kindergarten yet. Then he smiled, The first genuine smile anyone in our neighborhood had seen from him in months. "You know what?" he said. "I think you're right." That conversation changed Jake's trajectory in ways that wouldn't become apparent for years. He started spending time at the playground, not to cause trouble, but to play with Sunny and talk with me about everything from cartoons to why the sky was blue. My mother, recognizing the positive influence this interaction was having on both Jake and me, began inviting him to stay for dinner sometimes. Jake's parents, who had been so focused on their own problems that they had barely noticed their son slipping away, suddenly found themselves dealing with a teenager who was helping with chores, improving his grades, and talking about maybe becoming a veterinarian someday. The ripple effects continued to spread through our community. Mrs. Henderson, inspired by Sunny's story, began volunteering at the animal shelter in the next town over. Mr. Johnson, the gruff neighbor who had donated money for Sunny's care, started leaving food and water for stray animals, and eventually adopted an elderly dog who had been surrendered by his previous family. Dr. Martinez began partnering with local schools to teach children about animal care and responsibility, using Sunny as his star example of resilience and the power of compassion. But perhaps the most profound change was in my own family. My father, who had always been tired and distant after his long days at the steel mill, found himself looking forward to coming home to Sunny's enthusiastic greetings and my excited stories about our daily adventures. He began taking us on weekend trips to state parks and beaches, places where Sunny could run freely and I could explore the natural world that had become so fascinating to me. My mother discovered a passion for animal rescue that she never knew she possessed. She started fostering puppies and kittens for the local shelter, turning our home into a temporary haven for animals in need. I became her tiny assistant, helping to feed orphaned babies and socialize frightened animals with the same gentle patience I had shown Sunny. The experience taught me things that most children don't learn until much later in life, if at all. I learned that the world is full of suffering, but it's also full of people who are willing to help if they just know where to look. I learned that love isn't something you have to earn. It's something you give freely, especially to those who need it most. Most importantly, I learned that being small doesn't mean being powerless. My 3-year-old hands had helped save a life, and that act of compassion had created ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As the months passed, Sunny grew from a tiny, fragile puppy into a strong, confident dog who embodied everything good about second chances. His golden fur gleamed in the sunlight, his eyes sparkled with intelligence and joy, and his tail seemed to wag constantly, as if he were perpetually grateful for the life he had been given. But he never forgot where he came from. Sometimes, when we visited the playground, Sunny would walk over to the slide where we had found him and sit quietly, looking up at the metal structure with what seemed like contemplation. I would sit beside him during these moments, my hand resting on his warm fur, both of us remembering the day when everything changed. On one such afternoon, about a year after the rescue, a young mother approached us with her toddler son in tow. The little boy was crying, having fallen and scraped his knee on the concrete. Sunny immediately approached the child, gently nuzzling his injured leg and looking up at him with those compassionate brown eyes. The crying stopped almost immediately. "He's beautiful," the mother said, kneeling down to pet Sunny. "What's his name?" "Sunny," I replied proudly. "We found him buried under that slide when he was just a little baby. He was almost dead, but we saved him." The woman's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh my goodness," she said. "You're Emma. I've heard about you and Sunny. The whole county has heard about you too." I looked at her with confusion. I didn't understand why anyone outside our small neighborhood would know our story. "Honey," she continued, what you and your family did, it's inspired a lot of people. The animal shelter has gotten more volunteers and donations this year than ever before. There's even a program now called Sunny's Fund that helps pay for emergency veterinary care for animals whose families can't afford it. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Sunny seemed to sense it too, pressing closer against my leg and wagging his tail with extra enthusiasm. That's when I understood something important. The story of finding Sunny wasn't really about rescue at all. It was about recognition. Recognizing the value of every living creature. Recognizing our responsibility to help those who cannot help themselves. And recognizing that love is the most powerful force in the universe. As we walked home that day, Sunny trotting happily beside me, I thought about all the animals who were still out there, waiting for someone to find them, to hear their whimpers, to offer them a second chance. I thought about all the people like Jake who needed someone to sit with them on the swings and remind them that they weren't alone. And I made a promise to myself, and to Sunny, that I would spend my life looking for those who needed help, listening for those small, desperate sounds that others might miss, and responding with the same pure, uncomplicated love that had saved a tiny puppy buried under a playground slide. Years later, when I became a veterinarian myself, I would tell this story to children who brought their pets to my clinic. I would explain to them that every animal deserves compassion, that every act of kindness matters, and that sometimes the smallest hands can make the biggest difference. But even now, decades later, when I close my eyes and think about that autumn day in 1987, I can still hear that tiny whimper beneath the slide. I can still feel the warmth of Sunny's fur against my 3-year-old palm. I can still see those golden-flecked eyes opening for the first time, looking directly into mine with a trust that would change everything. And I am reminded, once again, that love, pure, innocent, unconditional love, is the most powerful force for healing in the universe. Sunny lived to be 15 years old, spending every one of those years spreading joy and comfort to everyone he met. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by our family, the entire community mourned his loss. The playground where we found him was renamed Sunny's Park, and a small bronze plaque was installed at the base of the slide, telling his story and reminding visitors that every life has value. But his greatest legacy isn't the park or the plaque or even the fun that bears his name. His greatest legacy is the lesson he taught all of us, that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism come not from strength or courage, but from the simple decision to care about someone who needs help. That lesson, learned by a 3-year-old girl who heard a whisper of pain beneath a playground slide, continues to ripple outward into the world, touching lives in ways that will never be fully measured or understood. And somewhere, in that beautiful place where all good dogs go when their earthly work is done, I know that Sunny is still wagging his tail, still spreading joy, still reminding the universe that love is always the answer. The end of this story isn't really an ending at all. It's a beginning, because every time someone chooses compassion over indifference, every time someone stops to help a creature in need, every time someone recognizes the sacred value of another living being, Sunny's story continues to unfold. Asterisk, and maybe, just maybe, that's the most beautiful miracle of all. But let me tell you about the weeks that followed that first magical day, because those were the moments that truly showed me what it means to heal. Not just a broken body, but a broken spirit. The first week after we brought Sunny home was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Every 2 hours, day and night, we had to feed him with a tiny bottle, measuring out precise amounts of puppy formula that Dr. Martinez had prepared specially for his delicate system. My mother would wake me gently in the middle of the night, and together we would creep into the kitchen where Sunny waited in his makeshift bed, a cardboard box lined with my old baby blankets. I remember the weight of that bottle in my 3-year-old hands, how seriously I took the responsibility of helping to keep this tiny life sustained. Sunny would latch onto the nipple with desperate hunger, his small paws kneading against my palm as he drank. His eyes never left mine during these feeding sessions, as if he were memorizing my face, storing it away in whatever place puppies keep their most precious memories. During the day, I became his constant shadow, or perhaps he became mine. My mother would spread a thick quilt on the living room floor, and Sonny and I would spend hours there together. I would read to him from my picture books, even though I could barely read myself, making up elaborate stories about brave puppies who went on adventures and always found their way home. He would lie curled against my side, his breathing synchronized with mine, occasionally lifting his head to lick my cheek when my voice grew tired. My father, who had initially been skeptical about bringing home what he called another mouth to feed, found himself completely enchanted by the tiny golden puppy. I would watch him come home from his grueling shifts at the steel mill, his face etched with exhaustion, only to have it transform completely when Sonny would toddle over to greet him with excited yips and vigorous tail wagging. Dad would sit on his recliner with Sonny in his lap, running his work-roughened hands gently over the puppy's soft fur while telling us about his day. For the first time in my young life, I saw my father's face relax completely, the worry lines around his eyes smoothing out as he smiled down at the little creature who had brought such unexpected joy into our home. The second week brought new challenges. Sonny had gained enough strength to explore beyond his cardboard bed, but his coordination was still developing. I became his self-appointed guardian, following him around our small house as he stumbled and tumbled his way through his exploration of this new world. I watched him discover the sensation of carpet beneath his paws, saw his confusion when he encountered his reflection in the sliding glass door, and witnessed his pure delight when he realized that the moving red dot from my mother's keychain laser pointer was something he could chase. These simple moments of discovery filled me with a happiness I had never experienced before. The joy of watching someone else experience wonder for the first time. But it was during the third week that something truly remarkable happened. Sonny had grown strong enough to venture outside, and my mother had purchased a tiny collar and leash set for our first official walk around the neighborhood. I insisted on holding the leash myself, and together we made our way down Maple Street at a pace that accommodated both a cautious puppy and an enthusiastic 3-year-old. As we walked, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Mrs. Chun, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down, came out to her garden and watched us with tears in her eyes. She had lost her own dog just a month before our rescue of Sonny, and seeing new life flourishing touched something deep in her grieving heart. Mr. Thompson, the middle-aged man who worked night shifts and usually slept during the day, appeared on his front porch in his bathrobe. Instead of being annoyed by our noise, he smiled and waved, later telling my mother that Sonny's happy barks had given him the most pleasant wake-up call he'd had in years. But the most profound encounter happened when we met Mrs. Garcia and her 7-year-old daughter, Isabella. Isabella had been born with a mild form of autism, and her mother had been struggling to help her daughter connect with the world around her. Isabella rarely spoke to strangers and often became overwhelmed in social situations. But when she saw Sonny, something magical happened. She knelt down on the sidewalk and extended her hand toward the puppy, moving slowly and deliberately. Sonny, with that incredible intuition that would become his trademark, approached her just as carefully. When his nose touched her palm, Isabella's face lit up with the biggest smile her mother had seen in months. "Can I pet him?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Sonny," I told her, proud to share my puppy with someone who clearly understood how special he was. "He likes it when you scratch behind his ears." For the next 20 minutes, Isabella sat on the sidewalk with Sonny in her lap, stroking his fur and whispering to him in a voice so soft that only he could hear her words. My mother and Mrs. Garcia stood nearby, both crying quietly as they watched this incredible connection unfold. From that day forward, Isabella and her mother would visit our house every afternoon. Isabella would spend an hour reading to Sonny, practicing her speech with an audience who never judged her pace or pronunciation. Sunny would lie perfectly still during these sessions, his intelligent eyes focused on Isabella's face as if he understood every word she spoke. Mrs. Garcia later told my mother that those afternoons with Sunny had transformed Isabella's confidence. She began speaking more clearly at school, participating in class discussions, and even making friends with other children who had previously intimidated her. This was my first real understanding of what my mother meant when she said that helping Sunny had helped us too. I was learning that love isn't a finite resource that gets depleted when you share it. Instead, it multiplies and grows, creating connections and healing that ripple outward in ways you never expect. As autumn deepened into winter, Sunny's presence continued to work miracles throughout our community. The local elementary school invited him to visit during their weekly reading sessions, where struggling students would read aloud to him without fear of judgment or criticism. The nursing home on the edge of town requested regular visits, where elderly residents would light up at the sight of his wagging tail and gentle demeanor. But perhaps the most significant transformation was happening within my own family. My parents, who had been drifting apart under the stress of financial pressures and the exhaustion of daily life, found themselves united in their love for this little creature who had become the center of our world. I would watch them sitting together on the couch in the evenings, Sunny curled between them, discussing his progress, his needs, his funny habits with a kind of intimate conversation I had rarely heard between them before. They began taking evening walks together, something they hadn't done since before I was born. Sunny would trot between them on his leash while I rode my tricycle alongside. And for the first time in my young life, I understood what it meant to feel like a complete family. The winter months brought new adventures and challenges. Sunny experienced his first snow with the wonder of a creature discovering magic. I remember the morning we opened our back door to find the world transformed by a thick blanket of white powder. Sunny took one tentative step onto the snow, felt it collapse beneath his paw, and immediately began bouncing through the drifts like a golden spring. I bundled up in my heaviest coat and snow boots to join him in the backyard, where we spent hours building snow forts and chasing each other around the bare branches of my mother's rose bushes. Sunny would burrow his nose into the snow, snorting and shaking his head, then look up at me with his face covered in white crystals, his eyes sparkling with pure joy. Those winter months also brought challenges that tested our commitment to Sunny's care. He developed a mild case of pneumonia that required round-the-clock medication and monitoring. I remember sitting beside his makeshift sickbed, a heated blanket draped over both of us, reading him every book in my small collection over and over again. During his illness, I discovered the true meaning of worry. I would wake up multiple times each night just to check his breathing, to make sure his nose was still cold and wet, to confirm that he was still with us. The fear of losing him was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a tight, suffocating feeling in my chest that made it hard to concentrate on anything else. But I also learned about the power of hope and determination. Every morning, I would whisper the same promise to Sunny. Today is going to be better than yesterday. We're going to get through this together. And somehow, whether through the magic of positive thinking or simply the resilience of youth, he did get better. The day Dr. Martinez declared Sunny fully recovered was one of the happiest of my young life. Sunny seemed to sense the good news even before the words were spoken, his tail wagging with renewed energy, his appetite returning with a vengeance. That evening, our entire family celebrated with a special dinner that included a tiny portion of plain chicken for Sunny, his first taste of people food since his recovery. I watched him savor every bite, and I felt a deep satisfaction that came from knowing I had played a role in his healing. As spring arrived and Sunny grew into a confident, healthy young dog, our story began reaching beyond the boundaries of our small neighborhood. A reporter from the local newspaper heard about our rescue and asked to write a feature story about Sunny's transformation and the impact he was having on our community. I remember the day the photographer came to our house. How seriously I took the responsibility of posing with Sunny for pictures that would be seen by thousands of people. I wore my best dress, a yellow sundress with tiny flowers that my grandmother had bought for Easter, and made sure Sunny's fur was brushed until it gleamed like spun gold. The article, titled 3-Year-Old's Rescue Transforms Community, appeared on the front page of the weekend edition. It told our story with sensitivity and detail, describing not just the dramatic rescue, but the ongoing impact Sunny was having on everyone he met. The response was overwhelming. Letters began arriving from all over the state, some addressed simply to Emma and Sunny, the little girl and puppy from the newspaper. Children sent drawings of Sunny playing in the snow. Elderly people shared stories of their own beloved pets, and families wrote to tell us how our story had inspired them to adopt animals from local shelters. But the most meaningful response came from Jake, the teenager who had been struggling before Sunny entered his life. He had been accepted to a pre-veterinary program at the state university, and he credited his conversations with me and his friendship with Sunny as the turning point that helped him discover his life's purpose. In his letter, Jake wrote, "A 3-year-old girl and a rescued puppy taught me that it's never too late to change your story. They showed me that every life has value, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest transformations." Reading that letter with my mother's help, I felt a sense of pride and responsibility that was far beyond my years. I was beginning to understand that the story of finding Sunny wasn't just about one afternoon at a playground. It was about the continuing choice to care for others, to listen for those who couldn't speak for themselves, and to believe in the possibility of healing and transformation. As my 4th birthday approached, we decided to celebrate with a party at Sunny's Park, the playground where our journey had begun. The entire community was invited, and people came from neighboring towns to meet the famous puppy and the little girl who had saved him. The celebration was everything a 4-year-old could dream of and more. There were balloons and cake, games and presents, but the best part was watching Sunny interact with dozens of children and adults who had been touched by his story. He moved through the crowd like a tiny ambassador of love, bringing smiles to faces that had been marked by worry or sadness. During the party, the mayor presented us with a special certificate recognizing our contribution to the community. But more meaningful was the announcement that the city council had voted to establish an annual Sunny Day, a community event focused on animal welfare, adoption drives, and celebrating the bond between humans and animals. As the party wound down and families began to head home, I found myself sitting on the same swing where Jake and I had shared our first real conversation. Sunny was curled in my lap, tired but content after a day of being the center of attention. Looking around the playground, I could see the changes our story had created. The slide where we had found Sunny now had a small garden planted around its base, maintained by volunteers from the community. A new bulletin board displayed information about animal care and adoption opportunities. Most importantly, the playground was full of children and families who had never visited before, drawn by the story of hope and transformation that had originated in this very spot. My mother sat on the swing beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" she asked. I looked down at Sunny, who was looking back at me with those same golden-flecked eyes that had captured my heart on that autumn day months earlier. I thought about all the people who had been touched by his story, all the animals who had found homes because of the awareness his rescue had created, all the acts of kindness that had rippled outward from one moment of compassion. "I'm thinking about how big love can get," I told my mother, using the vocabulary of a 4-year-old to express concepts that most adults struggle to understand. When we found Sunny, the love was just us. But now it's everywhere. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she pulled me closer. "You're absolutely right, baby," she whispered. Love is the biggest thing in the whole world, and it just keeps growing. As we walked home that evening, Sonny trotting beside us with his leash slack and his tail wagging, I made another promise to myself. I promised that I would never stop looking for opportunities to make love bigger, to listen for the small sounds of those who needed help, and to believe in the power of every individual to create positive change in the world. That promise has shaped every day of my life since then. Years passed, and Sonny grew from a tiny rescued puppy into a magnificent golden retriever who embodied everything beautiful about second chances. He became certified as a therapy dog, visiting hospitals and schools throughout our region. He appeared in educational programs about animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. Most importantly, he continued to be my best friend, my constant companion, and my daily reminder that love is always the answer to whatever challenges life might bring. When I graduated from high school as valedictorian, Sonny was there in the front row, wearing a tiny cap and gown that my mother had made specially for the occasion. In my speech, I told the story of how a 3-year-old's decision to listen to a tiny whimper had shaped not just my own life, but the lives of countless others. When I received my acceptance letter to veterinary school, the first person I told was Sonny. I knelt beside his graying muzzle and whispered the news in his ear, watching his tail wag with what I swear was pride and understanding. Throughout my years of study, Sonny remained my inspiration and motivation. When the coursework became overwhelming, when I questioned whether I was smart enough or strong enough to become a veterinarian, I would remember that autumn day when a 3-year-old girl had heard a sound that others missed and chosen to act on her compassion. The day I graduated from veterinary school, Sonny was 14 years old, elderly for a golden retriever, but still alert and loving. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I could see him in the audience, sitting proudly between my parents, his tail wagging slowly but persistently. That evening, as our family celebrated my achievement, I sat on the floor beside Sonny's bed and told him about my plans to open a clinic that would provide affordable care to animals whose families couldn't afford traditional veterinary services. I wanted to create a place where no animal would ever have to suffer because their family lacked financial resources. Sonny looked at me with those wise, golden-flecked eyes that had seen so much love and healing over the years, and I knew he understood. He had always understood. The Second Chance Animal Clinic, opened 2 years later, funded in part by donations that had been pouring in since our story first appeared in the newspaper. The clinic's logo featured a golden retriever puppy emerging from beneath a playground slide, with the motto, "Every life has value," printed below. On opening day, Sonny was there to greet our first patients. Though he moved more slowly now, his enthusiasm for comforting frightened animals and anxious families remained as strong as ever. Children who were nervous about their pets' treatments would calm down immediately when they met Sonny, and adults who were worried about veterinary costs would find their stress melting away under his gentle influence. The clinic thrived beyond my wildest dreams. We provided care to thousands of animals in our first year alone, from routine vaccinations to emergency surgeries. We partnered with local shelters to provide medical care for rescued animals, and we established a program that matched low-income families with sponsored veterinary services. But the most meaningful moment came during our first anniversary celebration, when Jake, now Dr. Jake Morrison, a successful veterinarian himself, joined our staff as a partner in the practice. Standing together in the clinic we had built, with Sonny resting peacefully in his favorite spot by the reception desk, Jake and I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. "It all started with you listening," Jake said, scratching behind Sonny's ears in the way that had become his signature greeting. A 3-year-old who heard something no one else heard and decided to care. "And it all continues because we keep listening," I replied, watching as a young girl gently petted her kitten while waiting for their appointment. Every day, There are whispers of pain or fear or loneliness that we have the power to address if we just pay attention. Sunny looked up at both of us with those magnificent eyes, and his tail gave one gentle wag that seemed to say, "This is exactly how it was supposed to be." 5 months later, on a quiet Tuesday evening in spring, Sunny passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was surrounded by our family, his breathing simply growing slower and slower until it stopped altogether, like a gentle tide receding from the shore. The grief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by an incredible sense of gratitude for the 15 years of love and joy he had brought into our lives and the lives of countless others. The funeral service, held at Sunny's Park, was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his story. Children who had learned to read by practicing with Sunny shared their favorite memories. Elderly people who had been comforted by his visits to nursing homes spoke about how his presence had eased their loneliness. Jake gave a eulogy that brought tears to every eye, describing how one puppy's rescue had inspired an entire generation to choose compassion over indifference. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from Isabella, the young girl with autism who had found her voice through her friendship with Sunny. Now a confident teenager, she stood at the podium and read a poem she had written. In the darkness underneath the slide, a tiny heart was beating. In the brightness of a child's love, a miracle was greeting. Not just the saving of one life, but the changing of so many. The golden light of kindness is worth more than any penny. Thank you, Sunny, for teaching us that love is always the way. Your memory will guide us through every single day. As Isabella finished reading, every person in the crowd was crying, not just from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of a life that had touched so many others. The bronze plaque installed at the base of the slide was inscribed with Sunny's story and a simple message. In memory of Sunny, who taught us that every life has value, every cry for help deserves an answer, and every act of love creates ripples that will never end. Today, more than 30 years after that autumn afternoon when I first heard a tiny whimper beneath a playground slide, I continue to work at the Second Chance Animal Clinic. We've expanded to include 3 locations, and we've saved thousands of animals who might otherwise have suffered or died. But more importantly, we've created a community of people who understand that compassion is not just a feeling, it's a choice we make every single day. Every morning when I arrive at the clinic, I pause for a moment at the memorial garden we planted in Sunny's honor. In the center stands a statue of a golden retriever puppy, his nose lifted toward the sky, his tail wagging in perpetual joy. Around the statue, families have planted flowers and small trees in memory of their own beloved pets. Children leave drawings and letters addressed to Sunny, thanking him for inspiring them to be kind to animals. Teenagers volunteer their time to help with adoption events and fundraising activities. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear something that reminds me why this work is so important. Last week, a 6-year-old boy named Marcus was walking through the memorial garden with his grandmother when he stopped suddenly and tilted his head, listening intently. "What is it, sweetheart?" his grandmother asked. "I think I hear something," Marcus whispered, moving toward a small bush at the edge of the garden. Following his pointing finger, I discovered a tiny kitten, barely old enough to open her eyes, mewing pitifully from beneath the thorny branches where she had somehow become trapped. Together, Marcus and I carefully extracted the kitten from her predicament. As I cradled her in my hands, examining her for injuries, Marcus looked up at me with eyes full of wonder and determination. "Can we help her?" he asked. "Can we make her all better like you did with Sunny?" Looking down at this beautiful child who had heard a small cry for help and responded with immediate compassion, I felt the familiar warmth spreading through my chest. The same feeling I had experienced as a 3-year-old touching a dying puppy's fur for the first time. "Of course we can," I told Marcus, watching his face light up with joy. "And you're going to help me do it." As we walked back toward the clinic, The tiny kitten purring softly in my hands and Marcus chattering excitedly about all the ways we could care for her. I felt Sunny's presence as clearly as if he were walking beside us. The story that began with one small girl hearing one tiny whimper continues to unfold every single day. In countless acts of kindness performed by people who understand that love is not just an emotion. It's a force that can transform the world, one rescued heart at a time. And in that truth, in that beautiful, endless continuation of compassion and hope, I know that Sunny's legacy will live forever, inspiring new generations to listen for those who cannot speak, to care for those who cannot care for themselves, and to believe, always and forever, in the miraculous power of love. Asterisk.